Morning, everybody, and welcome back. Before we went live, we were sitting here talking about different studies and research that are out there on both sides of this political debate that's going on. And I just want to tell you guys, I think the best thing I've seen over the last couple of weeks was on an episode of Last Man Standing. And I know that's going to take you by surprise, but there's a quote on there where Tim Taylor, whatever his real name is, he says, I think we could all find a way to compromise a lot better if we will just realize that what the other side wants is not evil. And I think that was a pretty good summation of what these conversations have been about being willing to talk to folks that we don't necessarily agree with on some issues, but realizing that just because we disagree does not make the other side evil or bad, and it doesn't have to come from that perspective. So once again, we appreciate all you guys, Steve Foster, Rudy Matire, Nikki Chrisman, and of course we've got Doug Griffith and Clay Taylor. So welcome back. Hope everybody survived the what is now being called Snowvid 21.
Absolutely. And it's February 24th, 2021. One of the things that, aside from policy or any of that legislation, as we are in the Texas legislative session, is that we found that developing relationships, I've had one with Kevin for 20 years. I've had one with Rudy for about the same. And now coming together with peers like Nikki and other concerned citizens of interest, Doug down in Houston and Clay with DPSOA, that people want to be safe. People appreciate interaction. I believe that's why people were placed on the earth, was to properly interact with each other. We're going to have issues. We're going to have problems. We're going to have differences. But when you sit down, as Kevin said, and you don't see someone else as just evil, unless they show that to you. I can say Maya Angelou is probably right. If someone shows you who they are, believe them. However, if you don't see that, then give someone the opportunity. And we've taken that for a good portion of the time because we're truly seeking to implement and find ways to make our society better, to improve techniques, processes, and administration, along with changing thought and eliminating bias, prejudice, and discrimination to the best of your abilities. It can't be legislated, but again, it can be worked on over time.
Even I want to say that there's a phrase I live by, and I teach all the people I mentor, all the folks I taught to about this is don't attribute to malice what can easily be explained by misunderstanding. Just don't assume folks are bad. Don't assume they're coming from a bad place. Everyone has their stories. Listen to their stories right there as well, and it can be easily just misunderstood because they have their story, they have their truth. Understand and listen to their truth, and then if that, share your own truth. And if you do that, that changes a lot of the conversations, the context, the complexion, everything else right there as well. As opposed to just thinking somebody's coming after you or someone's coming from and antagonize you to destroy you. Just listen and see about that.
And that's a great segue. Council member and chair of the African American Lawyers section of the State Bar of Texas, our man Rudy. Kevin, we left off a couple weeks ago about, and we don't want you and TMPA to be misunderstood because it seemed like the article that had come out in Houston had mentioned you were against the George Floyd Act and things of that nature. And I think this is a perfect time to say, wait a minute, let's not say Kevin Lawrence and the association is evil. Let's hear and understand in context by Kevin Lawrence and the association what was meant, what maybe there is a disliking of possibly, and how that can get resolved. So Kevin, if you don't mind, I turn the floor over to you.
Sure. And by the way, I will grant you that very often I am just way too blunt in offering my position, offering our position on things, but that's the kind of guy I am. And when I had the Zoom meeting with Representative Thompson and her staff, there was nothing in that news article that I didn't say directly to them during that Zoom call that I haven't said directly to Senator West. I was very disappointed with the news article, by the way, because I felt like it left out a whole lot of the underlying conversation, which they almost always do.
Yeah, because nobody would read it if it gave a nice, good assessment and a fair assessment of what you said, because then we wouldn't be all up in arms like we mentioned, and we could then point to the other side or someone who's different as evil. And that's what reads, that's what gets likes and looks, and it's a disservice to the community.
Yes, and the long and the short of it is this: the recommendations, the policy proposals that are in the George Floyd Act, by and large, are things that are better addressed in policy. They are better addressed in practice, in training, and not addressed in statute. Because once you put them in statute, they start having all kinds of ripple effects, and they're going to have an adverse effect on public safety. And we can go through those, and I think we've been through a lot of them in these conversations over the months that we've been doing this. But there's also—
let me ask you this, Kevin, before you start. You had mentioned early on, and you mentioned this to me, you did try or attempt to reach out, not seeing the other side as evil before the session started, correct?
Correct.
So that if there were concerns, you could address them prior to the session, so that you wouldn't be seen now 2 weeks ago while the session started as being this big opposition with 30,000 plus members of the George Floyd legislation that is now upon us, that you mentioned Senator West and the great Miss T. Symphonia Thompson from Houston have authored.
Correct. And I will say, a few weeks ago was the first opportunity that I've had to actually have a conversation with Miss T and her staff. Senator West, we had conversations with before the session started. And again,
But it came out in Houston, not in Dallas. Where you had the conversation city hasn't seemed to ding you. It was, I guess, your opportunity now at Miss T. And the only reason why I'm setting that up is because we as groups wanted to take the politics out of everything we did for a reason, because Kevin, you and Rudy and myself had been in the political world, and we didn't want to politicize this. We wanted to make it an effort of change for the better, for Black, white, yellow, Asian, whomever, whatever choice of lifestyle you have. We wanted improvement, period.
Well, and I think it's very important to understand, if we're going to have the conversation, as I tried to have with Ms. T and as we've had with Senator West, we need to talk not just about the policy recommendations, but the underlying premises that are leading to the policy recommendations. We disagree with the premises. We disagree with the application of the racial equity argument. We disagree that simply looking at data from our criminal justice system and saying, okay, whites make up 58% of the population, and therefore whites should in fact make up 58% of all people who are arrested. They should make up 58% of all citations that are issued. They should make up 58% of victims in all types of crime. That is irresponsible math. It ignores all other possible factors that play into the criminal justice system. It ignores economic standing. It ignores the community at large that you live in. It ignores all kinds of other factors. So
Kevin, and I really appreciate this, but that is no excuse to say, because of other factors, one group should be skewed or greatly adversely affected versus another.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. But then we have to agree on what data set we're going to use to measure.
That was going to be my comment. So where is the data set?
For example, look at the Northwestern thing. The 1 in 10 Black men, right, should expect to be, 1 in 1,000 Black men should expect to be killed by police in their lifetime. that what I heard?
Yep.
Okay. If you consider that the life expectancy of Black men, if you consider the number of people who die in police contacts every year and what percentage of those are Black men, and you start doing the math, that number falls completely apart. But guess what? We don't take the time to do the math. We look at the statistic, we assume that it's true because we saw it on the internet or we read it because some major university put it out. We assume it's true, and then we start rushing to change public policy based upon data that's just not accurate.
So is there a single, or not necessarily single, because I realize that you probably have to have multiple, but is there a central location where you can find these data sets that are representative of Texas as a whole, so that there's an equal starting ground? Because I think that was one of the concerns that we had, right, Stephen, is that there's some information, or in order to do the reporting, you have to be able to find the data that you need. And sometimes it's just not accessible, or it's difficult, or it's being put out by one organization and another organization is putting it out from here.
Well,
so you don't have a central source.
And Nikki, to
Depends
that
on what data
point,
you're looking
we had
for.
Fred, who I believe, or maybe it was Doug, I apologize, who said they worked on a study and they'd never seen the study.
It was Fred.
It's Fred. Okay.
Right. And it depends on what data you're looking for. But the fact of the matter is, there have been a number of different efforts. And let's go all the way back to the early 2000s when Senator West sponsored the racial profiling laws in Texas, and we created that database. We created that repository for that information, and it's now been collected for 20 years. I read an article in Grits for Breakfast this last week. I remember Grits for Breakfast is as far to the left as you can possibly get, right, Steve?
Yeah, but they still beat me up when I was at TYC for at least a minute.
Even he says, why aren't we mining that data? Why aren't we looking at all that data that we've now been collecting for 20 years? And the reason is because the data, the results, do not support the original hypothesis. They do.
Well, I'll say this on the racial profiling reports. I can say, just from looking at the ones here in Fort Worth, I did some research and pulled some data in Fort Worth specifically, because when we were talking with the police departments back in June, and it appeared to be, and I'm saying appeared because this is where it starts to get fuzzy, that the reporting of the number of reports of police complaints, the number of, there was quite a few numbers in there that kind of were not consistent with what the actual police department was dealing with. So the question then became, is what data actually goes from maybe complaints received, the stops, the different types of stops, compared to what is actually on the final report? Because at one point they said they had 0 complaints. We had six police cases of police brutality and some other stuff in neighborhoods where you would think that there would have been a report. And after talking with the police, we noticed that a lot of people make complaints. A lot of people, when they're racially profiled, there's some stops, and there are certain things that don't make it to the final report, whether it's the way that it's reported or whether it's the way the information is received. It didn't make it to a final, basically because it wasn't formal or official. It was kind of an informal thing. And so that kind of was interesting. And then the second thing that we noticed, we actually did take Leon Reed, who walked all the way to Austin to meet the governor, and the governor never did take out any time to meet him, which I think is just a disgrace and an epic. You know, it kind of adds to the discussion that, you know, that Black men don't matter, or that they don't want to have the conversation. Because even if he just could have sat with him and talked to him, I think that was a big miss. But not to belabor that, but he actually did the report. We broke it down. And when we looked at the number of, and I don't know why this is, but when you looked at the number of African Americans that were stopped in comparison to the other races, because they did break it down by race, it did seem like it was more. And when it looked at how many winded up in an arrest, it did appear to be more with African Americans than it was, even though there were more Caucasians that were stopped, it was more African Americans that went to jail, which was an interesting part. And so the racial profiling report gives you that high level data, but it doesn't really dig deep enough to see what is going on between that change.
Right. But it does provide you with a whole bunch of information that's being ignored. And by the way, I can't address these 6 cases that you're talking about other than—
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. But I'm just putting it out there.
Well, but you know, the racial profiling data was intended to measure information with officer initiated contacts and not with all contacts in general. Mm-hmm. The officer initiated contacts is what the focus of that entire thing was about.
Kevin, is there a question? I remember through our talks that y'all have mentioned as a whole, law enforcement, that different chiefs or different departments may do different reporting or not as good reporting. Maybe one chief is up on or head
Different,
of an
different data
agency.
set. Different data sets.
Different
It's a
data sets.
different data set. So yeah, the
Okay.
racial
Okay.
profiling just talks about like stops, police cars.
racial
So it's
profile-
completely, yeah.
racial profiling-
So, but don't they have to be reported? How are those
But
stops?
it's very, in the racial profiling bill, it's very specifically laid out what the departments have to tabulate, what they have to provide to TCOL, and TCOL provides to UNT.
Right.
And all
But
that.
hear me out. Could it be possible, only a question, merely a question, even in that specific database and requisite, because you and I have seen tons of bills here. If I'm white and I don't report that I stopped 5 white citizens and I only reported a couple of them, couldn't that number be lower? Because I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to report the 5. The other 3 weren't really, they were just kind of courtesies. These were 2 stops, but with the Hispanic or Mexican or Black, I had 7 of those. And I know I need to report those. Could that be skewing the numbers because you're like, I'm not going to report all these types of citizens because, again, it was more courtesy. I'm not trying to skew the numbers. I'm just saying there are, and it gets back to the inherent bias. Some may see what one may see as a stop and my life is threatened by law enforcement, to someone else may just be seen as a courtesy. Yes, sir, your officer, and I move on. I'm just wondering if that, even in a narrow scope, could that possibly be affecting the numbers?
To the degree that stops, that all police activities are audited and monitored these days. And of course, Rudy is a city council member. He can address how it's done in Pflugerville. Doug's president of the Houston Police Officers Union. He can address how this is done at Houston. Clay can talk about how DPS is doing. But I got to tell you, from where I sit, officers get disciplined up to and including termination for not reporting, for not filing that paperwork. And so I don't know what departments we would be thinking about where it is that to that degree.
Yeah, 2,700 of them. Okay, and so that's a lot. That's a lot for 254 counties.
But we also have a state law that says you have to capture that data in one way, shape, or form. I know for us, we have a separate form that we do on our computer that goes into a database. Every time you write a ticket, that ticket goes into the database. And then you've got other groups that, like the constables, they will write every single person they stop, they write a citation, either a citation or a warning ticket, which captures that data. So It just depends on what agency, but it has to be collected and sent into the state. So we know it's now, are there people out there that may not be doing all their stops? Of course. Plus, there's gonna be times you just forget. It's a human reaction. It's gonna happen. But I'm gonna use myself as an example here because the data doesn't always work the way you want it to work. So I've got a TAC team, 10 guys. We worked the Sunnyside South Park area. I worked there for 25 years. 98% African-American in that neighborhood. So what do you think the predominant stops that I make or that TAC team makes is going to be? And
but hear me out. What does the officer in River Oaks, does he really stop anybody as frequently as people may get stopped in Sunnyside? Probably not. So, I mean, and again, these interesting biases can occur and the numbers can be different. And again, do I want to report, the vice president of BP, or do I just say, sir, have a good day, and let him drive back to his house? He was going from Memorial High School back to his home. I mean,
yeah, but the deal is once you put yourself out on a traffic stop, you have to go in there and enter your racial profile data. You don't put names. You just put stop, reason.
Okay.
And
I'm just inquiring. I don't know the process. So,
well, I'm telling for us, that's the way it's done.
Okay.
It's there's no names involved or anything else. It's just you have the data points.
You make a very valid point, but you also raise the issue of this. Race is not necessarily the underlying reason. Skin color is not necessarily the underlying reason. There's a lot of other factors that come into play. There are statistical anomalies. There's no doubt about that. But the one you have trouble getting past is this. More than 95%, and this is across the board. If you pull Houston's data, pull DPS's data, pull Hudspeth County Precinct 3's data, the one consistent you find is 95% of traffic stops. The officer does not know the ethnicity or race of that individual at the moment they initiate the stop. They don't.
I would disagree with you.
Yeah.
Wait.
Based on myself in Austin, Texas. And I would raise my right hand on that one. But go ahead, Councilman. I'm sorry.
So this is interesting that we're having this conversation today because I don't know who got to see our city council meeting yesterday, but we were talking about the racial profiling report, right? That's required every year, and we had that presentation last night. And Doug, can you explain? This might be really important for the audience to hear and understand. What Kevin's saying, I don't have this. I mean, I get where you're coming from, Steve. Kevin saying this right here with that. I have no reason to doubt that right there from there.
And I can respond to Steve and say, based on myself, I did it for 22 years.
Now, but what is interesting is that next year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, I was told by our chief is that there'll be a requirement to report what happens after the fact, after somebody has been stopped, and to see if there's disparate treatment after the fact if a person's been stopped.
That's included.
We already do that. We already do that.
Oh, okay. So
it's already included.
Is that a T code? I guess is that a new T? Okay. So, and again,
it's actually on the racial. It's on the racial profiling reports. It actually indicates when. That's what I just said. So we were looking at, when you look at it, it tells what happened after, what did it lead to an arrest, did it lead, and so it goes through that.
And that, Nicole, and I guess that, we talked about TCOL and the standards, and the disparate standards were on different report. It depends who does that and does it where across the state, 2,700, law enforcement units. That's what I'd be more interested in, because I hadn't really thought about it from that end before. Because I thought, just like what from Stephen was saying, I was just thinking initially, okay, what do you think? Are you just stopping them because the phrase driving while black, driving while brown, et cetera, what's going on here? But what happens after the fact when you are cognizant of that and seeing there's disparate treatment over there? And that may speak more to the conversation regarding what we're talking about.
But and there are still statistical anomalies. But once again, jumping to the conclusion that it has to be because of skin color to the exclusion of all other factors is in fact
It's wrong. I agree.
There's a lot of other factors that have to be considered in those situations.
And I'm gonna tell you, we've got 10 guys that do radar on freeways. 10 guys. As soon as that radar goes off, do they know the skin color of the person they're stopping? Absolutely not. Radar went off, they're popping them.
Right.
It doesn't matter what color they are, they're still speeding. And that's what that's gonna boil down.
10 guys out of 5,000, really?
Oh, we have more than that. Trust me, we have more than that. I'm at any one point in time.
And again, the reason why I think it's pertinent is because it's not, as we did going through school, throw out the high, throw out the low of your grades, and there was your grade for social studies. It's a little more complex than that, and I think that citizens probably feel there's more than just one high and one low when you're looking at mining this data and being specific. And so
you make a very valid point, Steve. The statistical anomalies exist regardless. Okay. If you take out this factor over here, they still exist. Then what is the underlying cause? We look at the number of people who die during police contacts every year, and it's about 1,000. Okay. The number of those who are African-American is 24-25%. That's pretty consistent. And this is based upon the Washington Post data that they've now been collecting for the last 6 years.
But again, and Kevin, recognize that's twice the average of the population as a whole.
The population is 13%. So yeah, it is almost double that.
But I think what Kevin's saying is that this is a statistical anomaly, and he's trying to say that no one has figured out specifically why that's the case. Is that what you're trying to do?
Because let's look at those 95% of those traffic stops where the officers don't know the race of the individual before they make the stop. Still 24 to 25% of those stops are African American. Why? If it's not because of skin color, what else is coming into play there? And I think that's what the hard
is it vehicle type? Is it
And-
vehicle
and
type?
that's
You see
smart.
Dayton's,
Could be.
Dayton's on as
be.
rims or something like that. There are things, colors of vehicles can dictate. And again, there's other factors that can dictate whose vehicle most likely it is.
And,
What
and Steve and Kevin, I
neighborhood
think you guys
you're
talked about
in?
the same thing. That's the heart of the issue, because Kevin, I think that we've gotten to the point where we're saying, okay, listen, we're not saying that, at least I don't think people responsibly are saying, okay, you're just stopping a bunch of black and brown people because they're black and brown. I don't think we're saying that, but we're saying what leads to that being the case, even if you're not cognizant of it. What is it about that? And that's when we talk about what's the implicit bias, what's the issue what's causing that? And
Loud music coming from the vehicle because people don't turn it down, and you hear dun 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 dun, and it's like, oh, let me make a little stop here. And again, I'm just trying to create what I've seen, and I've not been around as long as Kevin, or Clay, but I've driven a lot of places in Texas and throughout the United States, going to school in the East Coast, Midwest, and I've been stopped. I've been stopped.
How many times in your lifetime, Steve? How old are you?
54, just turned 2 weeks ago.
54. How many times have you been stopped?
10, 12.
Wow. Amateur. I've been stopped at least 30.
Well,
I
that I recall is not pleasant. The ones that, again, like I said, the ones that don't, that aren't much of anything. I've had my cousin stop me because he's a peace officer in Jersey just to mess with me, and he even drew his weapon, and I said, really? Again, not loaded, and he one of my favorites. But there are 10 to 12 where I've been stopped going to Houston, where I've gone to residential to try to go to a Christmas party, and I wasn't going fast. I don't have funny purple and green painted cars. I don't ride Dayton's. I don't have 24s. I don't have any of that.
Steven, do you have tinted windows?
Slightly. Yes. Whatever is
Were you
allowed.
stopped day or night?
Both. I was stopped by DPS.
Do you think they could actually see in the car?
Can they see in the car? I don't know. I would tend to say no more than yes.
If I'm behind you at night, you got tinted windows, I ain't gonna be able to tell what's in that car.
That's correct.
Just saying, it's you know.
Yeah, no. And again, I want this out there because this, I think, at least addresses thought processes that people have that may create bias or some type of perspective when we talk about these issues. And that's the thing that I'm bringing up. Nikki, I see you want to say something.
Well, I just want this. I don't know if this is a myth or truth, so this is a way to talk about it. I've heard in the past that before someone even gets stopped, the police officers will run their plates or try to get other kind of identifying information. Is that not true?
It depends on the stop.
Yeah, I was about to say, and you know what's interesting about that, Nikki? I think we're going to bring it. My FBI friends have brought that up to me. They're like, "Hey, wait a minute, we can't do that, but officers can do that, and it's legal. It's perfectly legal."
And a lot of times, that's what people think, that you already kind of know what race, or if you know the car, or people. I have been stopped twice in Dow Worthington Gardens. One time, I was stopped because they said I didn't stop at a sign, and they were like, "We need to get all this information, all this other stuff." There were other people in the car as well, and so that was in the middle of the day. Didn't get arrested, but it was just I didn't think I had did anything wrong, right? But they stopped me for that. Then there was another time they said they couldn't see my sticker in the front of my car, which didn't make sense to me. It had some kind of lines or something through it. And so there's a saying here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there are certain places where you don't want to get stopped. Dow Worthington Gardens is known for, and when I say known, in the amongst African Americans and in that community, similar to the ones that Stephen identified, Dow Worthington Gardens here in the Metroplex is considered one that targets a lot of African Americans. And I know that I've been stopped at least twice. I avoid going that way, but I was stopped twice for, to me, no reason other than maybe it was when I was younger and I had, other people in the car, and we would always, it's just one little stop. And so you make sure you go under the speed limit, and you make sure that you're stopping and doing everything you need to do, just because of the fear of being stopped. And so it's there. We just got to figure out, why. You're saying that you don't agree with the premise, but obviously there's some kind of reason why we're all identifying. When I say all African Americans or even Hispanics or, Mexican Americans are dealing with that type of that type of fear. It's there for a reason. So we just got to
Okay.
get to the bottom of why.
And we're not disagreeing that the numbers aren't there. What we're saying is that the jumping from the numbers are this to the numbers are that because of this is irresponsible. We do need to look into exactly why all that is. You know, I don't want to ignore your question about running the registration. I've got 3 vehicles sitting in my driveway. One is registered to me, one is registered to my wife, and one is registered to my mother-in-law. Which one I'm driving at any given moment, the cop's going to get that name when they run that registration. It's not going to say whether it's male or female. It's not going to say whether he's white, black, or Hispanic. It's not going to say, it's simply going to say that vehicle is registered so-and-so at this address. And it either has or has not been reported stolen. Now, I've been off the streets a long time. Doug, Clay, you guys tell me, is there anything more that comes back on that registration return these days?
Nope.
Tells you what kind of vehicle it is, who owns it, and the address, right?
No, and whether or
Doesn't
not
even tell
there's
you
a
the
lien
color.
on it.
Doesn't even tell you the color of the car. The car might have been painted how many times since it was purchased. We don't. It's not even in that registration. So it, you know, so
let me ask you this, Kevin, because y'all are seasoned law enforcement veterans of the state of Texas. We're sitting here today, right now, as you rightfully said. We don't want to take certain premises and have them be the underlying or overt reason why this is happening. So in your best law enforcement perspective and minds, why is it that we are seeing the numbers not necessarily because of race? What is determining these types of numbers to the best of your ability at this point? I don't want to, I'm not trying to box Kevin Lawrence in and then all of a sudden somebody run out and do what they did to you in Houston. I'm just trying to give you an opportunity as, subject matter experts to at least say, we have to look at certain areas or what of this to be true.
Well, and I don't know that we can give you one answer that says this is why. Okay. What we can tell you is there's probably a number of different factors that come into play here. Economic status is obviously one of them. Crime is more prevalent in our poorer neighborhoods. That is across the board without a doubt. What the reasons for that is, I don't know. We can guess, but I don't know that we can come up with a metric that says, okay, the crime in the 4th ward of Houston is 4 times what it is in River Oaks. I don't know that we can come up with a metric that says 60% of that is because of X, and 25% of it is because of Y, and 15% of it is because of Z. We can give you the data, we cannot give you the reasons, okay? But so economic status has something to do with it. Police resources have something to do with it. Where are police resources going to be targeted?
I was just about to say that same thing. How many times have you heard, oh, we've got an issue in this area? We've got a problem with murders right now in Houston, obviously. And our southeast side, Sunnyside, South Park area is our biggest issue. So what do? They flood officers in that area and say, we want y'all making traffic stops. We want you making traffic stops. We want you to get these guns off the streets. We want you to get these bad guys off the streets. Well, what's that going to do? It's predominantly African-American. So who are you going to stop? Disproportionately, who's going to get stopped in the city of Houston for the next 2 weeks? African-Americans, because that's the neighborhood that we have to target. It's so you have to look at that, from a command level down when you're looking at these numbers.
So Kevin, wouldn't it make sense to have this as an interim study where you can get a real good run at this? Because nobody's really, again, kind of like we're doing, delved into these situations that would show spikes in percentages, spikes in numbers because of calls by people at the top of the system looking to do what you would say is to have good public, response to situations in particular neighborhoods. And if we can see that that goes to economics, and if we see that goes to some specific ethnicities, at least it'll explain better why twice the population is getting stopped of a population that's 13% that's really not prevalent in some areas.
Well,
So Stephen, if I may, something that,
Yes, sir.
something, if I can bring this up, it sounds to me, and again, this is what happens when you have conversations, right? That everyone is trying to figure out why this disparity exists. We don't know why this disparity exists. We have a suspicion, some people based on race, some people based it on economic access, income, et cetera, right there as well. Unfortunately, in this country, let's be blunt, you can unfortunately often not conflate the two. They tend to overlap each other right there, unfortunately, in a lot of ways with that. But it sounds to me that there's an interest in trying to figure that out, because we're saying, hey, wait a minute, even we have these studies where in fact they don't know where it is, it's still 25%, over, African Americans, even though they make up 13% of the population. That makes sense. It also sounds like there needs to be a better understanding, because Doug, what you're saying, and I was just thinking about what you're saying, it makes sense. It's like, hey, wait a minute, no, we're having a problem with murders. This is happening in this specific neighborhood in this area. So we're going to send law enforcement over here as well. And because you're policing, people are going to look at it, oh, wait, okay, they're over policing this specific area, when you're saying, wait a minute, no, there's an issue. We're trying to target it and work from there as well. How to right size that, how to message that, how to articulate that to people to better understand and comprehend that. And, Stephen, I thought it was great that you asked Kevin that question, because you're right. He is the SME in this. It's like, okay, well, why is this happening? But I don't blame Kevin for not having an answer for this, because that's the whole point. This is literally the issue. I mean, and I hope people are watching and understanding. This is literally the issue. We see there's a problem. We all see there's a problem. What we're trying to understand is, why is this problem exist? And how do we get to that right there as well? How do we bring resources to address that problem? We're not going to address this problem for quote unquote blaming Whitey for everything that happens right here. At the same time, we can't say that implicit bias and all these other things, some reason don't exist with that. What's the issue? How do we get to understand why that disparity exists in the statistics?
And can we resolve it with training officers throughout the year periodically to reduce anything that would allow that? I don't know, but at least, and I see Kevin shaking your head. Go ahead.
No, we can't solve it.
Right.
Because until we figure out exactly what the causes are, training the officers doesn't solve it unless you.
No. But again, you said what I like though is you have some factors and variables, even if it's a grouping. I'd rather, improve those groupings that you can, as a veteran, determine that maybe officers going through training don't really have any focus even on the things that you think may possibly be the rationale of what's going on. We don't pinpoint those things. It's like if we're strategizing against an opponent, of course, it comes back to sports. You don't know exactly what they're going to do, but you've seen film. You see they like to do this. You've seen over a course of a game, they double team Rudy. They don't want him to score. So you have to do something to counterbalance that. Rudy's going to have to be a decoy, or Rudy's going to have to, there's no fluidity in regards to solving issues. We are kind of stand still in concrete and just looking around. We're data mining, but we're not offering any rationales to the data like we're finally doing now, like Rudy said.
And my disagreement with Rudy is, I don't believe we have all agreed that we want to mine that data, which is what our opposition to the George Floyd Act is all about. See how I came back full circle here? The George Floyd Act is based upon the premise that we've already figured out the cause, and now we're trying to address the cause, and we disagree with that premise right there. We don't believe the cause has been fully vetted, and therefore changing public policy based upon that false assumption we believe is irresponsible. And again, I'm going to pick on Nikki. If race is always going to be the determining factor, why isn't gender also a determining factor? Why is it females only get arrested 27% of the time? And
well, I would say this. I would say the population is more concerned about Steve as a menace to society than Nikki. I'm a bigger, stronger, most people see, oh, he was an ominous figure. He was coming at me in the dark. He was going to get me. I'm an
Okay,
Ivy League
okay.
attorney, man. What are you
Wait,
talking
wait.
about?
How
I'm
about-
concerned
how
about you.
How about we let Nikki
Let's
respond?
look just
Yeah,
at
how
white
about we let
people who
Nikki
get arrested. Look
Thank
only
you.
at white people that get arrested. Look only at non-blacks who get arrested. And that anomaly is even greater then. The statistical difference between male and female is even higher among non-blacks than it is among black. Why is that?
Well, because
Yeah.
again, maybe white women aren't seen as threatening.
Maybe white women just don't commit as many crimes. Maybe black women just don't commit as many crimes. Maybe women just don't commit as many crimes as men.
And I
Maybe
think,
women are just smarter.
and that could be true. And we are also cuter. So we are also cuter. So I'm not going to stop that cute lady when I can go stop this ugly looking man, as Steve Foster has said. But
Not ugly. Hold up.
I said,
I may be more menacing than ugly.
yes,
Can I
let me
go on the
say, right,
record?
or menacing. There you
Okay.
go.
All
So I think that that's a very good point. And I think I'm just going to say that leads back to what I'm saying is when we're collecting this data, we have all of these requests for reports out there, but everyone is collecting different things. And I don't think anyone really digs on either side, really digs to see what is actually happening. And as a result, you have one idealism based on this data set that you're looking at and one idealism based on this data set you're looking at, but there's no common data set that's being reviewed by both that would actually lead to it, because that is an interesting statistic when you start breaking it down to race, because then I think you can, if you do it from race, then gender, then I think you also need to do it to age, right? I mean, that all starts to happen too. Are younger black men being stopped more than the older black men? Like it becomes, there's so many subsets of information to where when you start at the top and slowly keep breaking it down, you could wind up coming up with all kinds of data sets.
And if we will expand our search, expand our research, and look at not only the arrests, citations, searches, etc., look at victimization as well. Look at the fact that I read this statistic the other day. The Bureau of Justice Statistics says that African American women are significantly more likely to be victims of domestic violence than non-African American women. What's the cause of that?
Kevin,
And the answer is we don't know, but shouldn't we look at it? Shouldn't we find out why that is?
and it goes, and this is what we do know. We do know what the premise is what Steven says. People want to be able to take care of their families, have good jobs, live a good life, and work for themselves. That's what they wanted. That's the basic. That's the American dream. It's the American hope. It's the reason my parents moved from Haiti, over here, to be here, because that's what it is. The American dream, man. God bless this country. It may not be perfect, but it's the greatest country in the world. Amen. And we can at least address the disparities when it comes to education and treatment when it comes to housing and all these other aspects. We can address those things. And it's what we talked about this. I mean, like we said, we're going on almost a year now of us having these conversations, is that if we're looking at these things uphill down the line, we don't have to have it go downhill, domino effect, to you guys being the backstops in society to try to fix this stuff once it becomes a serious issue. If we actually do invest in better education for folks, if we don't have disparate treatment when it comes to housing, if we're looking at healthcare and we're saying, hey, listen, okay, we need true, healthcare for these people. How are we going about doing that? What are we doing about that to make sure these issues, so then you're not sick and you're not missing your job, so therefore you're not missing income, so then you're able to take care of your kids, so you don't have to worry about, the circle that continues with that. Those are things that we can do. And mental health, those are things that at least we know for a fact we can do something about it. We can try to address those things and uphill, and then they never have to meet the Kevins or the Dougs or the Clays of the world right there, because this is what's happening here. Because at least we said that. Doug, you've said it numerous times, and you talk about that, about these poor kids who are coming from these poor neighborhoods, and they're slinging rocks or anything else right there as well, and they could have been accountants. But they had another path. They literally could have been accountants. They could have been doing something else completely with it as well. But who's showing them that path? Who's giving them that opportunity? And that's where education is key. And that's where I think that it just makes a big difference to talk about this. Because Kevin, you're right. I don't know when we're going to get that. We know the disparities exist. I don't know when we're gonna find an actual solution. Okay, what is the issue? Why is this happening right here as well? But things that we can address, we need to address those on the front end so they don't ever get to you guys.
We don't disagree with that. What we are saying with regard to this statute, this proposal, with regard to a lot of the police reform bills that are out there, is that they are based upon the premise that this is all because of bad policing or bad police officers. We're not disagreeing that there's not bad policing that happens. There's bad everything that happens. And yes, we need to address that. But we could do away with policing altogether in this country, and it's not going to solve the crime problem. It is not going to solve the problem of poverty. It's not going to solve the disparate treatment. It's not going to solve a whole bunch of the other ills if we just do away with law enforcement. As a matter of fact, it's going to make pretty much all of them even worse. Yeah. Our argument is,
it goes.
Sorry, Clay, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it goes back to me, that what Kevin said reminds me of what I told you about a teenage Hispanic girl down in Roma that I stopped for narcotics one night. Her whole ideology was, what am I going to do? What else am I going to do to make this kind of money with not even a high school GED? And that's what's sad.
Yeah, I agree.
The crack dealer that I was telling you about that I dealt with years ago, 16-year-old knocking down $6,000 or $7,000 a week. It's hard to convince that young man that crime doesn't pay.
And something else I want to bring up when y'all were talking about these numbers, y'all say that African Americans make up 13% of the population. That's accurate nationwide. But when you start going into cities like Houston, it's more in the 30 percentile range. So you start looking at traffic stops and stuff like that. Here, you're going to find a different level than what you would in Pflugerville.
Right, but Doug, do you see the same increase or leveling of the white population that's at 58, 60%? You don't see, and I think this is where you would get the, in the alternative, as we say, you don't see that in the more affluent white neighborhoods of 60% stops, so on and so forth. The stops are very low. So everybody then would presume, well, they're all law-abiding citizens, Stephen, and the folks over here just aren't.
Well, there will be a difference, and I'll explain it, because in the African-American neighborhood, again, we're talking lower income. That's where I beat this drum all day, every day, that we have a disparity in educational resources, jobs, and everything else in the African-American community. That's where this has to start. I mean, you can yell about policing all day long, but the good people in the neighborhood want us there. They want us putting the bad guys in jail. They want to live safely in their own community, but they're being victimized by their own people. And it's sad. It breaks my heart every time I have to go out there and there's an elderly person that was robbed because some little turd went out there and robbed them. And if you look in that neighborhood, the stops you make, no registration, no insurance, no driver's license. If you go make a stop in River Oaks, guess what they're going to have? Registration, insurance, and a driver's license, because they can afford it.
The good thing you brought out, Doug, and I think this goes to some of the inherent bias. You have folks and you rotate throughout the city. You go to Sunnyside and you recognize, Black Houstonians, maybe not as many with registration, insurance. But then you get driver X coming in from out of town who has that, but you've seen from the experiences of life, Black, usually without the registration. And I think a lot of that bias comes from carryover from what you see. And again, there's no reset button to say, somebody, and it's just kind of putting people in boxes to try to have a place to start when you finally get to them. And it may produce some, I said may, Kevin, produce some bias when interacting with citizens.
But before that, you said usually, and I'm sorry, that's like the old geometry problem that you got showed in high school, where you could prove that 2 equals 1, or that 1 equals 0, or that 0 equals any other number. The usually part is wrong. Even in those minority communities that Doug talked about, it's not usually, it's not the majority of African Americans don't have insurance or whatever. It's just a higher percentage, because there's more poor people, and more poor people have more equipment violations. They don't have the registrations up to speed.
Well, again, and Doug mentioned the percentage increase, and that's why and maybe my language was I should have shown the increase of percentage, not a standard as the word usual, because words do make a difference, and I understand.
Let me finish. Let's go down to the lower Rio Grande Valley. Let's go down to Mission, McAllen, Weslaco, Harlingen, okay, where there's not a significant African American population. You know who's still getting stopped? The poor people. Even in the richer parts of the valley, it's still the poor people that are getting stopped.
Right.
I don't care what color they are.
Yeah, it was amazing when I was down there for the border detail, place called Roma Bluffs, where it's high activity, illegal activity, and a car could come by and you run that license plate, and that car had been stopped probably on average 4, 5, 6, 10 times in that area.
Why aren't they using the Lamborghinis and the Lexuses and the Mercedes?
So Clay, you can tell how many times a car has been stopped when you run the plate?
In our CAD system, yes, you can.
Okay.
That's an internal agency system. But
okay.
So Clay, all those people that are muling drugs, that are doing the human trafficking, why aren't they driving the expensive, really nice cars?
I have pulled dope out of 84 Crown Victoria about 20 times more than I've ever pulled it out of a Cadillac.
Because they don't want to lose the expensive cars. That's a business decision.
Right.
I had a sergeant from East Texas to back up what Doug was saying earlier with regards to demand and where you send your resources, and he broke it down in simple terms. He said, you don't hunt or fish where the fish aren't biting or the birds aren't flying, and that's where you gotta go where the demand is.
All right, guys, we're up against 11 o'clock already.
Let's next time hear more from Nikki. It's great. I gotta run another meeting right there as well. But no, this is a good discussion, and I think Kevin, Doug, Clay, I wish there was a way. I mean, obviously you're captured on video, right? Just
yeah. I was going to ask you, is there any way you can use what they're saying in your new position to help galvanize?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to run, but I was going to say, just capture what you're articulating right here is like, what's that's what we need to find out.
This is what we've been arguing all along. Let's have those conversations. Let's really do some better diving into the data rather than jumping to the conclusion that all cops are bastards. It's just not.
Well, I also want to say that's not what the caucus says or anything else.
I know, I get it.
Or anything like that. That nobody, like I always say, that no responsible person's ever saying stuff like that. But I get what you're saying, bud. I see it for sure. All right, I got to run to my other meeting, but take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
have a good
week.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
All right.